There comes a moment in every inner journey when you must choose between attachment and truth. Not the truth of what you wish someone could become, not the dream you built around them, but the truth of what is. Emotional attachment is not only love, it is identification. It is when your sense of self begins to depend on another's presence, attention, or approval. And the psyche suffers whenever its center is placed outside itself. Detachment is not coldness. It is not bitterness. It is not the denial of feeling. True detachment is conscious separation, the decision to feel fully without being ruled completely. You are not trying to erase the bond. You are reclaiming your inner authority. First, you must see clearly. Most suffering in attachment comes from illusion. You are attached not to the person, but to your projection, the meaning you gave them, the role they play in your unfinished emotional story. When you withdraw the projection, you begin to see them as they are, human, limited, imperfect, and this clarity weakens emotional dependency. Second, accept the grief. The mind wants to negotiate, to bargain, to revisit memories and rewrite endings. But the psyche heals through honest mourning, not mental argument. Grief is not a sign you should return. It is a sign you are separating. Let the pain move through you without turning it into a story of injustice or destiny. Third, reclaim the energy you have invested outward. Every obsession is misdirected life force. Each time your thoughts circle around them, gently return attention to your own development, your work, your body, your creativity, your inner discipline. Where attention goes, psychic energy flows. Fourth, examine the hook. No attachment forms without an inner wound it attaches to. Ask yourself, what need did I try to have them fulfill? Security, recognition, belonging. When you identify the hunger, you stop confusing the person with the medicine. Fifth, create symbolic distance. Reduce unnecessary exposure, not to escape emotion, but to allow the emotional charge to cool. The nervous system cannot detach from what it constantly consumes. Space is not avoidance, it is psychological oxygen. Finally, strengthen your inner center. A person with a grounded identity can love deeply without dissolving. Build a relationship with solitude. Learn to sit with your own thoughts without reaching outward for relief. When you become internally anchored, attachment transforms into choice rather than need. Detachment is not the end of love, it is the purification of it. When you no longer cling, you can finally see. When you no longer chase, you can finally stand. And when you finally stand, you discover you were never incomplete. Emotional attachment often forms not because we truly see another person as they are, but because we unconsciously project onto them qualities, meanings, and promises that originate within our own inner world. The mind is not a passive observer in relationships. It is an active painter. It fills in missing details, exaggerates signals, and interprets gestures according to hidden desires and old emotional patterns. When someone enters our life and resonates with an unmet need or unresolved longing, we begin to layer them with symbolic importance. They become more than a person. They become an answer, a rescue, a completion, a mirror of our ideal. This projection feels intensely real because it is emotionally real, but it is not factually accurate. Projection is the psyche's way of externalizing inner material it has not yet recognized as its own. Traits we admire, strengths we lack confidence in, or wounds we carry from the past often get transferred onto another individual. We may believe we are drawn to them purely because of who they are, when in truth we are drawn to what they represent to our inner narrative. The attachment grows stronger the less clearly we see. Ambiguity actually feeds projection because the unknown gives the imagination room to operate. When we do not fully know someone, the mind completes the picture with fantasy. This is why emotional attachment can feel disproportionate to the actual relationship. A brief connection can produce deep longing, not because of shared history, but because of projected meaning. The person becomes the carrier of hope, validation, security, or transformation. Losing them then feels like losing a part of oneself, because psychologically that is exactly what happened. You placed a piece of your inner world onto them and called it love. Projection also explains why others sometimes fail to live up to our emotional expectations. We are disappointed not by who they are, but by who they never claimed to be. The conflict arises between reality and the internal image we created. Instead of recognizing the projection, the attached mind often tries to force reality to match the fantasy, leading to control, overgiving, jealousy, or emotional dependence, awareness weakens projection. When you begin to question what exactly you believe this person gives you emotionally, you start tracing the feeling back to its origin within yourself. You recognize that the admiration, safety, or inspiration you attributed to them is also a dormant capacity within you. The emotional charge shifts from outer possession to inner development. The person returns to human scale, no longer a symbol, no longer a solution, but a separate individual with limits and contradictions. Attachment softens when perception becomes clear. You still care, but you are no longer psychologically fused. You relate instead of cling. You feel instead of mythologize. And in that clarity, connection becomes more grounded, more honest, and far less fragile. Detachment is often misunderstood as emotional shutdown, indifference, or the forceful rejection of feeling. But true detachment is something far more deliberate and psychologically mature. It is not the numbing of emotion, but the conscious separation between your inner stability and the presence or behavior of another person. Suppression pushes feelings into the unconscious, where they continue to operate with greater distortion and pressure. Detachment, by contrast, brings awareness to feeling, allows it to exist, and then chooses not to be governed by it. One is avoidance, the other is mastery. When people attempt emotional suppression, they try to turn off care through denial or distraction. They tell themselves they no longer feel hurt, longing, or anger, while their behavior reveals the opposite through tension, irritability, or compulsive thought. Suppressed emotion does not disappear, it changes form. It may become resentment, anxiety, physical fatigue, or emotional coldness toward unrelated people. The psyche does not reward force, it responds to understanding. What is pushed down does not dissolve, it waits. Conscious detachment begins with permission to feel without panic. Instead of fighting the emotion, you observe it. You say inwardly, this feeling exists, but it is not my identity, and it does not control my decision. There is space between the experience and the self who witnesses it. In that space, freedom appears. You are no longer reacting automatically, you are responding intentionally. The emotional wave can pass through without dragging your actions with it. This separation is built through awareness and boundary. You recognize where your responsibility ends and another person as begins. You stop trying to manage their choices, predict their moods, or secure their approval as a condition for your inner balance. You allow uncertainty without rushing to relieve it through contact or reassurance. This does not mean you stop caring. It means your care is no longer fused with fear of loss. Detachment also involves reclaiming emotional ownership. Instead of saying, they make me feel, you begin to say, I feel. The shift is subtle but powerful. Your emotional state is no longer treated as something controlled from the outside, but as an internal process you can regulate and understand. This reduces desperation and increases psychological dignity. You are no longer emotionally hostage to another person as presence. There is also honesty in conscious detachment. You admit when something matters instead of pretending it does not. You acknowledge attachment before you loosen it. This honesty prevents the inner split that suppression creates, where one part of the psyche feels and another part denies. Integration, not division, produces stability. As this practice deepens, emotions become signals rather than commands. Longing becomes information, not instruction. Sadness becomes movement, not paralysis. Care becomes choice, not compulsion. You remain capable of love, empathy, and connection, but you are no longer internally destabilized by shifts in relationship dynamics. The heart stays open, but the center stays grounded. Grief is often treated as something to avoid, shorten, or silence, yet it is one of the most necessary psychological processes for genuine emotional release. Whenever a meaningful bond, expectation, identity, or dream is lost, the psyche must reorganize itself, and grief is the mechanism through which this reorganization happens. It is not merely sadness, it is an inner recalibration. Without grief, emotional energy remains frozen around what is gone, and the personality cannot fully return to balance. What many call weakness is actually a form of deep internal processing. Loss creates a gap between what was emotionally invested and what is now available in reality. Grief is the bridge that allows the mind and nervous system to cross that gap. It works slowly because attachment forms slowly. Every shared moment, repeated habit, and emotional reliance builds neural and psychological pathways. When the connection breaks, Those pathways do not instantly disappear. Grief is the gradual unwinding of those bonds. Expecting instant emotional neutrality after loss is like expecting a healed bone the day after a fracture. Healthy grief includes waves of feeling: sadness, anger, confusion, even temporary numbness. These are not signs of regression, but stages of emotional digestion. The psyche is metabolizing experience the way the body metabolizes food. If this digestion is interrupted through constant distraction, forced positivity, or premature replacement of the lost bond, the emotions remain partially processed and tend to resurface later with greater intensity. Unfelt grief often turns into chronic anxiety, guardedness, or unexplained emotional heaviness. Grief also restores psychological truth. During attachment, especially intense attachment, perception is often mixed with hope, fantasy, and projection. Loss strips away illusion and forces direct contact with reality. This contact hurts, but it clarifies. Through grieving, the mind updates its internal map. What is no longer here is acknowledged as no longer here. This acceptance cannot be achieved purely through logic. It must be emotionally registered. Tears and emotional pain are not malfunctions. They are signals that reality is being integrated at a deeper level. Another essential function of grief is emotional honoring. To grieve is to recognize that something mattered. When people try to skip grief, they often become emotionally dismissive to protect themselves, but this dismissal weakens their capacity for future connection. Allowing grief preserves emotional depth. It says, this bond had value and therefore its ending has impact. This attitude maintains inner integrity and prevents the hardening that follows repeated emotional avoidance. Grief also returns scattered emotional energy back to the self. At first, it feels like depletion, but over time, it becomes retrieval. Each wave of sorrow loosens the emotional investment from what is gone and slowly makes that energy available again for life, creativity, and new relationships. The process cannot be rushed without cost. Timelines vary because attachments vary. When grief is allowed rather than resisted, it moves. It has motion by nature. It rises, peaks, and gradually softens. What remains afterward is not emptiness, but increased emotional realism. The ability to remember without collapsing, to care without clinging, and to continue without denial. When emotional attachment loosens or breaks, a surprising amount of mental and emotional energy is revealed. What once flowed constantly toward another person through worry, anticipation, memory, fantasy, and analysis suddenly has no clear destination. Many people experience this as restlessness or emptiness, but it is actually a available life force waiting to be redirected. The psyche always invests energy somewhere. If it is not consciously guided, it returns to rumination and emotional looping. Redirecting this energy into personal growth is not a distraction tactic. It is a restructuring of inner investment. Attention is the channel through which emotional energy travels. Wherever your thoughts repeatedly go, your emotional charge follows. When you continuously revisit conversations, imagine alternate outcomes, or monitor someone else's actions, you are feeding the attachment circuit. The first step in redirection is noticing these mental habits without judging them, then deliberately shifting focus toward constructive inner and outer development. This shift feels unnatural at first because the old pathway is emotionally familiar, even when painful. Growth requires choosing what is strengthening over what is familiar. Personal growth absorbs emotional energy effectively because it produces visible and internal change. Physical training, skill building, creative work, study, and disciplined routines convert emotional intensity into structure and competence. The same intensity that once fueled longing can fuel mastery. Emotion is not the enemy of discipline. It is its raw material. When you work on your body, your craft, or your knowledge with consistency, the psyche experiences progress, and progress reduces the urge to emotionally regress. Emotional energy can also be redirected inward through self-examination. Instead of asking why the other person acted as they did, you begin asking what the attachment revealed about your needs, fears, and patterns. Journaling, reflective thinking, and mindful observation transform emotional charge into self-knowledge. This is not self-blame, but self-recovery. Each insight reclaimed from emotional pain becomes psychological strength. You are converting reaction into awareness. Creative expression is another powerful channel. Writing, music, art, design, and building projects allow emotion to move rather than stagnate. Unexpressed feeling seeks repetition. Expressed feeling seeks transformation. Creation gives form to inner experience and prevents emotional pressure from turning inward destructively. Even simple acts of making and organizing restore a sense of agency that attachment often erodes. Social and purposeful engagement also help redirect energy. Contributing to others through teaching, helping, or collaborating shifts the emotional center from fixation to participation. The mind stops circling one emotional object and begins interacting with a wider field of meaning. Purpose diffuses obsession because it expands identity beyond a single bond. Consistency matters more than intensity in this redirection. Small daily investments in growth gradually retrain attention and emotional flow. At first, you repeatedly pull your focus back like a muscle under training. Over time, the return becomes automatic. The emotional system learns a new default direction toward development rather than dependency. Energy once tied to longing becomes fuel for capacity, stability, and forward movement, strengthening the inner foundation that future relationships will stand upon rather than replace. Attachment rarely forms in an emotional vacuum. It takes root where there is an inner unmet need, a psychological hunger that has not been fully recognized, named, or nourished from within. When this need remains unconscious, it searches for an external provider. A person then appears who seems to answer that hunger, and the bond quickly intensifies beyond proportion. What feels like irresistible attraction is often need recognition happening below awareness. Identifying the unmet need does not cheapen the feeling. It clarifies its true source and restores inner leverage. Unmet needs often trace back to early emotional patterns, the need to be seen, chosen, soothed, respected, or safely guided. If recognition was inconsistent, attention becomes intoxicating. If safety was unstable, reassurance becomes addictive. If affirmation was rare, praise becomes emotionally binding. The adult mind believes it is responding to the present person, but the emotional brain is responding to an old deficit. This is why certain attachments feel urgent and non-negotiable. They are wired to survival-era emotions, not present-moment reality. One way to detect the hidden need is to observe what specifically feels unbearable about the distance or loss. Is it the absence of communication, validation, protection, admiration, structure, or belonging? The pain point reveals the hunger. Instead of asking, "Why do I want them?" ask, "What feeling did I consistently receive or hope to receive through them?" The answer points inward. The attachment figure became a psychological supplier of a particular state. Once named, the need stops hiding behind the person. Another indicator is emotional disproportion. When your mood rises and falls entirely based on someone, as availability or approval, the attachment is likely need-driven. Healthy affection adds to your stability. Need-based attachment replaces it. The nervous system begins outsourcing regulation. You feel calm only when they respond, worthy only when they affirm, secure only when they stay. This outsourcing is the core mechanism of dependency. Recognition is the first step in reversing it. There is also a compensatory element. Sometimes we attach to traits we have not developed in ourselves: confidence, decisiveness, emotional warmth, direction, or creativity. The other person carries qualities our psyche wants to integrate. Instead of developing those traits internally, we stay close to the one who embodies them. The bond feels essential because psychologically it is, but the task is integration, not possession. What attracts you may be a blueprint, not a destination. Identifying the unmet need requires emotional honesty without self-accusation. Needs are not weaknesses, they are signals. Problems arise only when they are denied or outsourced unconsciously. When you bring the need into awareness, you gain choice in how to meet it through self-development, supportive community, therapeutic work, spiritual practice, or disciplined self-care. The emotional charge begins to detach from the individual and reattach to the inner work. As clarity increases, the person you were attached to returns to human scale. They are no longer the sole gateway to relief or fulfillment. The psyche relaxes because the supply line has been rerouted inward and diversified outward. Attachment loosens not through force, but through understanding. Inner stability is the psychological ground that allows you to relate without losing yourself. When this ground is weak or unformed, connection turns into dependency because the relationship becomes the primary source of regulation, identity, and worth. The person is no longer someone you share life with. They become the structure that holds your emotional balance together. Building inner stability reverses this dynamic by creating an internal center strong enough to remain steady, whether someone comes closer or moves away. From that center, connection becomes an expression of desire rather than a strategy for survival. Stability begins with self-regulation, the ability to experience emotion without immediately discharging it through impulsive action. Instead of needing instant reassurance, immediate replies, or constant closeness to feel okay, you develop the capacity to sit with uncertainty and soothe your own nervous system. This is trained through small daily practices, pausing before reacting, breathing through emotional spikes, delaying compulsive communication, and allowing feelings to rise and fall without obeying them. Each time you remain present without grasping, your inner structure strengthens. A stable inner core also depends on self-definition. When you know your values, priorities, and direction, relationships add to your life but do not define it. Without self-definition, identity becomes relational. You know who you are mainly through how someone treats you. Approval then feels like existence, and distance feels like erasure. Clarifying what you stand for, what you are building, and how you choose to live creates a personal axis that does not rotate around another person as behavior. Consistency with yourself is another pillar. Many forms of dependency grow from self-abandonment, repeatedly overriding your limits, preferences, and intuition to maintain connection. Each act of self-betrayal weakens inner trust and increases reliance on the other person. Stability grows when you keep small promises to yourself, honor your boundaries, and tell the truth about your feelings even when it risks disapproval. Self-trust reduces emotional bargaining because you no longer negotiate against your own well-being. Solitude plays a critical role in strengthening this foundation. Time alone without constant stimulation exposes emotional reflexes and teaches you how to companion your own mind. At first, solitude may trigger restlessness because dependency patterns become visible in silence. With practice, being alone becomes restorative rather than threatening. You learn that your inner world is inhabitable. This discovery transforms connection from escape into enrichment. Competence in practical life also reinforces emotional stability. Managing your responsibilities, finances, health, and routines produces grounded confidence. When your life functions dependably, you are less likely to cling to a relationship for a sense of control or rescue. Order in daily living supports order in emotional life. As inner stability grows, your posture in relationships changes subtly but powerfully. You listen more clearly because you are not filtering everything through fear of loss. You express needs without desperation. You can say no without panic and yes without surrender. Attraction remains, care remains, intimacy remains, but they are no longer fused with emotional necessity. The bond is sustained by mutual willingness rather than psychological hunger, and presence becomes an offering instead of a requirement. And so the final step is not to harden your heart, but to return it to its rightful place within your own keeping. You do not detach to feel less, but to stand whole. What is meant to walk beside, you will not require you to abandon yourself to keep it. What leaves creates space for deeper alignment with who you are becoming. Let your peace be self-generated, your worth self-rooted, and your direction self-chosen. When you no longer cling, you relate with clarity. When you no longer chase, you attract with presence. And when connection becomes a choice instead of a need, you are finally free to love without fear and walk forward without losing your center.